Hey there, friends! In this video, we have prepared for you some stories about the amazing finds that have been discovered recently. Let's get right to the chase. A gun. A resident of Jaworzno, Poland, was renovating his house when he found a well-hidden gun in the wall. It turned out to be a double-barreled shotgun from the late 19th or early 20th century. After this discovery, the man immediately called the police. Officers arrived at the scene, took the gun, and began a thorough analysis of the weapon, its possible owner, and its date of origin. After examining the weapon and conducting all the procedures, it wasn't possible to identify the legal owner of the weapon, and it wasn't established that the weapon could have been obtained as a result of a crime. Therefore, the court ordered that the weapon be forfeited to the state treasury or destroyed. And it was here that the opportunity arose to donate this weapon to a museum. According to the decision of the District Court of Jaworzno, the weapon was donated to the Castle Museum in Prusina. The man acted in an excellent way, cooperating with the authorities and with the museum which wanted to acquire the gun. Now, the gun can be seen and admired by the next generations of the museum visitors. The German soldiers. The city of Volgograd was called Stalingrad during the World War II. It was the scene of fierce battles. The Red Army fought against the German troops and their allies. The surroundings and the city itself turned into a large cemetery of dead soldiers. To this day, workers find the remains of the dead in excavations. Recently, one of the residents of Volgograd decided to rebuild her house and hired workers to do it. During the excavations, it turned out that 5 German soldiers were buried on her property. Searchers were called in and recovered the remains. Some of the soldiers were identified by their personal dog tags. They will now be reburied in the military cemetery. Soldiers of the Red Army. In April this year, Russian searchers carried out work to find the dead soldiers of the World War II. On the first day of the search, 4 soldiers of the Red Army were found. They were killed in battle in 1943. Their personal belongings, ammunition, and grenades were found. Unfortunately, none of the soldiers could be identified. They had no signed objects or dog tag with them. Several dozen explosive devices were also found, and they were destroyed by sappers. All found soldiers were reburied with honors in the military cemetery. A sword. A well-preserved Viking sword inscribed with the name Albert was discovered by workers dredging the Vistela River in Wrocław, Poland. Historians said that it was a stroke of luck to find the sword in such a pile of earth. It might not have happened if one of the workers had not noticed the iron sticking out of the ground. Researchers from the Nicolaus Copernicus University in Torun made an X-ray image of the weapon and dated it to 950 AD. At the moment, there are about 170 known Albert swords. They were made in the 9th to 11th century using different metalworking techniques. It is believed that they all came from the same workshop, which specially marked its products with this inscription. The World War II soldiers. One of the bloodiest battles of World War II was the Battle of Stalingrad. It lasted for 200 days and nights and ended with the Nazis getting crushed. The commander of the German troops, Field Marshal Paulus, surrendered as a prisoner. Search Group Gordia is engaged in searching the dead soldiers of World War II in Volgograd region, where the fiercest battles took place. Every year, they find the remains of dozens of Soviet, German, Romanian, Hungarian, and Italian soldiers. At the end of the search season, all the remains are reburied in military cemeteries. A large amount of work, sometimes dangerous, is carried out every year. After all, there are still many weapons and explosives in the buried trenches and dugouts. The sappers had to be called in to remove and destroy mines, bombs and grenades almost every day. If there are any objects or weapons of historical interest, they will be on display in the new Volgograd Museum. A bomb. On April 23rd, a World War II bomb was found during construction work in the city of Murmansk. It was a 500-kilogram high-explosive bomb. During the war, Lend-Lease supplies to the USSR were delivered to the northern convoys through the port of Murmansk. German aviation constantly hit the ports and the city's information structure. Probably one of these bombs had no explosion and was in the ground for 80 years. The entire port had to be shut down to defuse the bomb. After that, the dangerous find was taken to a military ground and destroyed. A pistol. An Omsk resident found a pistol which probably belonged to his father while clearing out the garage. The man said he saw a holster in the garage corner under the garbage. He picked it up. He immediately realized that it was a gun because of its weight. He decided to call the police. The experts found out that it was a Czech pistol from the war period. The holster also contained 2 magazines and 16 rounds of 6.65 mm ammunition. Having been stored in a dry place and well oiled, the pistol was in perfect condition. The man received a reward for turning in the unregistered weapon. The helmets. In the fall of 215, military items were discovered near Zvenigorod. They were found during the construction of the Central Ring Road. The incredible find turned out to be combat helmets from the 16th century. Before that, similar artifacts were found in Russia 17 years ago. What we usually see in museums are late finds from the ancient collections. Each appearance of a new helmet is an event in archaeology. The helmets found date back to the first half of the 16th century and are very close in shape to the helmet of Ivan the Terrible himself, which is kept in a museum in Stockholm, as well as to the helmet of Tsarevich Ivan Ivanovich, which is kept in the Moscow Armory. The condition of the find astonished archaeologists. After a small restoration and study, the armor, together with other finds, was transferred to the Historical, Architectural and Art Museum Reserve of Zvenigorod. A T-70 tank. The remains of a Soviet T-70 tank have been recovered from the ground in Belarus, a kilometer from the famous Luchiskaya Height, where heavy fighting took place in 1944. The place to search was determined using archival documents. From the documents, it was found out that in March 1944, 3 Soviet tanks of this model were hit at this very place. The T-70 is a light Soviet tank. It was developed in October 1941 at the Gorky automobile plant. In January 1942, the T-70 was adopted for service and was mass-produced in several plants. Production of the T-70 continued until October 1943, when it was decided to discontinue its serial production. This was due to the results of combat operations in the summer of that year and the Red Army's great demand for Su-76 self-propelled artillery units based on the T-70. A total of 8,231 tanks of this type were produced. The local residents and the district administration helped in the search for the tank by providing a tractor for excavations. One of the tank pieces had a shell hole. It is likely that the tank was destroyed by an internal explosion of ammunition. The searchers hope to find out the names of the tank crew and their fate, and the parts of the tank will be handed over to the local museum. Il-2 aircraft. Il-2 plane with 2 fighters on board. Pilot Sergei Bogdanov and gunner Nikolai Khartov fell near the city of Kerch in November 12, 1943. The fate of the plane's crew became known only 80 years later. Last summer, Crimean searchers found the crash site of the Soviet Il-2 bomber near Kerch. The information about the crash site was provided by local residents, and the work on this site began. The hope of the searchers was a hint of the plane's number, and they were lucky. They dug up a plaque with the number of the plane on it. Then they turned to their fellow historians. So they found out the names of the crew and that the plane was shot down on November 12th. About 50 meters from the crash site, they found the grave of the pilots. There are reasons to believe that the Il-2 fell on enemy positions, and the dead crew was buried by the enemy for sanitary reasons. The condition of the corpse was such that even their valuables were not removed, life jackets and parachutes. One of the dead pilots wore a cross. We managed to find relatives of Nikolai Khartov, a gunner of the Il-2 fighter plane. Pictures of Nikolai and his mother were found in the photo albums. A German armored personnel carrier. More than 80 years have passed since the end of the Battle of Stalingrad, but searchers continue to find military artifacts from those battles. Another amazing find was made near the city of Volgograd. A medium German half-track armored personnel carrier was completely buried underground. The searchers had to dig it out and reassemble many broken parts into a whole. Probably the tank came under artillery fire and was completely destroyed. The restorers will have a lot of work to do in order to restore it, but first they will have to find the money to purchase the missing parts, which still have to be found all over the country. 300 soldiers. A sanitary burial of Soviet soldiers was discovered during construction works in the city of Volgograd. A grave of more than 300 soldiers and commanders of the Red Army was dug in the hole left by the fall of a large aircraft bomb. There were terrible street battles at Stalingrad that time, and many soldiers were killed every day. The dead were quickly buried in craters and trenches to prevent epidemics. It wasn't always possible to mark these places. Perhaps the records were simply lost during the battle. Only a few of the dead could be identified. In the case of one of the Red Army soldiers, the only means of identification was his homemade dog tag, on which he had scratched his name. The grave was found only by chance. The builders had to dig a trench to lay an electric cable when they saw a lot of bones. All the soldiers found were reburied in the military cemetery. Discovery in the Alps. High in the Alps, a fortification of the Austro-Hungarian troops was found, in which a large number of artifacts of that time were left. The cave was literally sealed off for a century by a layer of snow and ice, and it was only recently that it was discovered by chance. The cave is located almost at the top of Mount Skorluza, and interestingly, it is not of natural origin. In 1915, when the shelter was built, it was a very important strategic point. Located at an altitude of 3,000 meters above sea level, the Austro-Hungarian troops took control of the pass where the borders of three countries crossed: Italy, Austria, and Switzerland. Throughout the war, Italian troops tried to regain control of the pass, but they failed. The Austro-Hungarian army built many such structures in this area, creating a whole network of defensive fortification. The fortress was abandoned immediately after the Austro-Hungarian peace treaty was signed on November 3, 1918. The troops left the area very quickly, and many things remained inside. Over the next few years, heavy frost and snow literally sealed the cave, turning it into a veritable time capsule. The bunker itself was quite large. Inside, there was a barrack with a staff and bunks for 20 men. and the commander had a separate room. The soldiers slept on sacks stuffed with seaweed. About 300 items were found, including uniforms, ammunition, cartridges, and other equipment, as well as documents and personal belongings. They even found an Italian newspaper that the Italian troops threw into the trenches to spread their propaganda among the enemy soldiers. All of this was perfectly preserved thanks to the low temperatures. The helmets, for example, are so well preserved that they are almost rust-free. The ice literally sealed the last years of the war. According to scientists, this shelter is a very important find, shedding light on little-known details of the so-called White War in the Alps. So far, almost the entire structure had already been dismantled and reassembled in the town of Bormio in a local museum. An airplane. Last year, a young man in Papua New Guinea discovered the wreckage of a World War II military plane. During the war, there were fierce naval battles in the Pacific involving thousands of planes, many of which crashed into the ocean or rugged jungle. Researchers speculate that there may be several hundred planes from the war in the waters of New Guinea. Local diver Rod Pierce has found more than 50 different planes lying in the ocean floor. He said most of the wreckage contains the remains of pilots, but local authorities do not want to spend money to raise the planes or recover the remains to identify the pilots. He is often contacted by relatives of missing soldiers. They ask for information about their brothers, uncles, and grandfathers. This time, the plane found in the jungle with the remains of the pilots has been identified as belonging to the Canadian Air Force. A search for the identity of the plane's crew is underway in the archives. On May 7, 2024, in Novosibirsk, Russia, the Soviet I-16 warplane took its first flight after being restored by the Wind Memory of Victory project participants. The I-16 was flown by Vladimir Barsuk, an honored test pilot of the Russian Federation. Fragments of the plane were found in Karelia in June 1992. It is believed that the I-16 fighter was in service with the 155th Fighter Aviation Regiment, based in the area, and made an emergency landing in the summer of 1941. The 155th Fighter Aviation Regiment participated in combat operation from the first day of the war. On June 27, 1941, it arrived to Petrozavodsk with 33 I-16s. The main task of the regiment in June and July of 1941 was to provide the cover for the bombers. At the time of inspection of the aircraft, no armament was found. This may indicate that after the forced landing of the aircraft, the rescue team worked on the site and removed all armament. The name of the pilot and the serial number of the aircraft could not be determined from the available fragments and the engine. Fragments of wooden fuselage, center section, landing gear, consoles, part of the plumbing, and the M62 engine with the serial number 1431 were found at the landing site of the I-16 aircraft. According to the fragments of armament installation, this I-16 was identified and further restored as Type 24. When examining the fragments of the recovered aircraft, it was found out that this I-16 had a camouflage coloring with black spots on a green background. This coloring was adopted by the Naval Aviation of the Red Army Air Force. During the inspection, it was also found out that the aircraft had a dark green protective paint on the top side and a gray-blue paint on the bottom side. This data was taken into consideration when painting the restored aircraft. In 1992, the fragments of the I-16 aircraft were transported to Novosibirsk. The second life of I-16 began by searching and restoring the aircraft constructional documentation. The production and restoration of the design elements of the plane were carried out by the Novosibirsk aviation plant, named after Chkalov, and the Aviarestavratsia Company. Restoration of this legendary I-16 fighter is a long-term, laborious work of a large number of patriots and enthusiasts. It begins with search teams and ends with aviation enterprises of our country. Flying the I-16 nowadays is a tribute to the great aircraft designers and military pilots, to the heroism of the Soviet people in defeating Nazism in the Second World War. We remember and preserve our history. We pass it on to the younger generation. Boris Osetinsky, president of the Win Memorial Victory Foundation, commented on the flight. The I-16 was developed in the early 40s of the 20th century. Its appearance marks a new era in the development of combat aviation. It was the first monoplane fighter designed to replace biplanes. It was faster and more maneuverable. At the same time, the I-16 didn't forgive the pilots for the mistakes they could make while flying biplanes at lower speeds. The I-16 was one of the most difficult aircraft in terms of control. It was the most mass-produced fighter at the beginning of the war. In order to successfully complete combat missions, Soviet pilots needed maximum attention and concentration. Now, this plane will take part in parades and air shows. In Belarus, near the city of Vitebsk, a KV-1 tank was raised from the swamp. With great effort, a team managed to pull the KV-1 out. Unfortunately, the tank was destroyed by an internal explosion, and the searchers had to pull it out piece by piece. After that, the KV-1 was sent for restoration. During the work, restorers decided to completely replace the running gear of the tank with the identical base from Isu-152. The most valuable part of the tank is the turret with the L-11 cannon. This is the only surviving turret of this type. Only 800 pieces of the L-11 cannon were produced, and then it was taken out of production, since the tankman criticized this cannon because of the complexity of the maintenance. A lot of work was done to restore the KV-1 to working condition. The restorers reported that the complexity of the work was in the thickness of the armor. It was 60 to 75 millimeters. Only the turret with the gun weighs more than 7 tons. The Isu-152, from which the parts for the restoration were taken, was built in 1944, so all the instruments and mechanisms inside the tank are authentic. This KV-1 took part in battles, which is proved by traces on the armor left by the German bullets and shells. According to the locals, the tank column was attacked by the German Air Force, and this KV-1 drove into the forest to escape the air attack. The tank got stuck in the pit. The tankmen tried to pull it out with the help of other tanks, but they failed. After that, the tank was blown up by the crew. This version is supported by the bullet marks on the turret of the tank. You can see that they could only have been made by the plane. The original lower armor plate shows a hit from a large caliber shell. The armor wasn't penetrated. In 1941, German artillerymen didn't have many guns capable of hitting the KV-1 tanks. It was an impressive weapon indeed. At the moment, the tank is fully restored to running condition and participates in filming and reconstructions of the World War II battles, firing only blank cartridges and shells. A Mauser pistol. A resident of Kazakhstan brought a Mauser pistol from 1896 to the police. He had found it by chance a year ago and kept it in his house. However, the man was afraid that he would be sentenced to prison for illegal possession of the gun and decided to hand it over to the police. The Mauser K96 was developed in Germany and was widely used in many countries in the first half of the 20th century. One of the reasons the Mauser pistol became popular was its enormous capacity for the time. The pistol was positioned as a light carbine, which it was. The wooden holster was used as the buttstock. The man received $800 for turning the gun in to the police. It is likely that the Mauser will be exhibited at the local museum after being examined. Guns in the Czech Republic. The Czech policeman showed the weapons that had been handed over to the police after the announced action for the disarmament of the local population. Although almost 80 years have passed since World War II ended, there are still many weapons hidden in various cellars and attics. The police had to have an entire room for the storage of these weapons. There were pistols, revolvers, rifles, automatic rifles, and even machine guns. Many of the pieces are of museum value and will make a part of an exhibition after being examined. All the other weapons will be destroyed. A cache in Spain. Spanish police raided arms dealers on the Costa del Sol and discovered a large cache of weapons and much Nazi memorabilia. The leaders of the gang, 2 Germans and a Briton, were arrested. The arms cache of the gang, which supplied weapons to drug smugglers in southern Spain, was unusually large. In all, 121 pistols, 22 automatic rifles, 8 submachine guns, 9,976 rounds of ammunition of various calibers, 8 silencers, 273 magazines, and even a 1.5-kilogram grenade were seized. Artifacts from the time of the Third Reich were also confiscated. In the words of the police, the room was more like a small museum, except that all the weapons were ready for use. All the weapons and artifacts were confiscated, and the explosives were destroyed by the bomb squad. A German vessel. In Serbia, a German transport ship was raised from the bottom of the Danube. It was sunk 80 years ago. With the Red Army advancing rapidly, Hitler ordered his fleet to sink several dozen vessels. Many were carrying ammunition and now pose a danger to navigation. To completely demine the river, large financial expenditures are required. In the fall of 1944, the Red Army began to advance westward. At that time, the mouth of the Danube was jammed with German transport ships in search of a way up the river with the retreating troops. The ships were caught in a trap, and it was decided to sink them. So, in September 1944, near the Serbian village of Prahovo, about 200 ships and barges went to the bottom. They were loaded with property and ammunition. Until today, it is visible on the surface of the Danube, where the German ships were sunk. After 80 years, one of these ships was brought to the surface. The hull was covered with barnacles, the anchor chain and the traces of explosion can be seen. Only this small ship was demined by Serbian bomb squad for more than 2 months. Altogether, according to historians, there may be more than 10,000 different munitions aboard the sunken German ships. After the war, Russian engineers managed to raise the 7 best-preserved ships from the bottom. After that, the ship cruised the Danube under the Soviet flag. To clean up the riverbed, a lot of money is needed. Therefore, raising the German ships from the Danube will apparently take a long time. Japanese guns. Russian searchers have examined the Japanese fortification from World War II, which is located on the island of Aiturup. This is one of the many Kuril Islands. A lot of artifacts from the war have been found, but the most important find was Japanese cannons, which have been in their position for 80 years. Due to the cold climate, many of the artifacts are in perfect condition. During the war, the Japanese troops did a great job of building underground fortification. Some tunnels go deep into the ground. Underground passages and rooms for soldiers and weapons were dug between the bunkers. Most of them have survived to this day. After the war, Soviet engineers simply blew up the entrances to the catacombs so that no one could get there. Some of the weapons and ammunition remained underground, since it was too expensive to remove Japanese property from the island. The searchers found a lot of holes in the ground and realized that the underground passages were not only between the coastal bunkers, but also led into the interior of the island. They tried to enter, but it was very dangerous. Among the dense grass, they found several Japanese guns of different caliber from 75mm to 105mm. You can still read Japanese inscription on them. You can still read Japanese inscriptions on them. Japanese tank. The majority of finds and photos of Japanese military equipment of the World War II were made on the northern Kuril Islands, Shumshu and Paramushir. This is not surprising. There were fierce battles between the Red Army and Japanese troops. However, in 1945, Japanese military units were on almost all island of the Kuril Ridge, including Europa. There was a lot of military equipment, including tanks and other vehicles. In 2021, searchers found a light tank Hago on the island of Europa. Japan began producing them in 1934 and used them until the end of the World War II. Unfortunately, the tank was dismantled after the war and only the hull remained. The engine, turret and tracks were removed. But for the searchers, it was an incredibly interesting find. They spent a whole hour inspecting and taking pictures. First up, a Soviet sniper from World War II. A Russian team searching for downed planes from World War II in the Belgorod region stumbled upon something incredible. They found pieces of a Soviet Il-2 aircraft, including parts of the wings and fuselage. Get this, on one of the parts there was a number. This number could help identify the pilots and uncover their history. This area saw fierce fighting in 1943, and remnants of war are everywhere. But that's not all. Near the plane wreckage, they found the remains of the Red Army soldier. This soldier had a sniper badge, indicating he was an expert marksman. They also found 2 medals on him, one for defending Stalingrad and the other for military service. The medal numbers might help identify this brave soldier. Although no weapons were found, it's possible his comrades buried him on the battlefield. Next, an antique musket from the depth of the Black Sea. A group of Russian divers got quite the surprise at the bottom of the Black Sea. They found an antique musket. Now, figuring out exactly when it's from is a real head-scratcher. The scientists are making educated guesses, and one possibility is that it dates back to the Crimean War. Get this, once upon a time, a tourist approached the divers. She had lost her pricey bracelet while swimming near the Crab Island. Talk about a coincidence. They found the bracelet and, hold on tight, they also found a gun from the 19th century. A military historian who specializes in the Crimean War period thinks it's a Russian Litichstutzer model 1844. He says they can pinpoint the date more accurately once they clean the barrel and the breech lock. Hold on, it gets cooler. Check out this hidden U-boat. Picture this. A young man is using his metal detector on the beach after low tide. Little did he know he was about to stumble upon something extraordinary. He noticed a stream of water still flowing from a rocky area and decided to wait for the tide to go down even further. An hour later, he went back and found a bizarre structure, being a base of a pier. Turns out there were side entrances leading inside. The moment he stepped inside, it hit him. He was standing in an old submarine. The builders probably used it as a foundation for the pier to save money. Talk about ingenious recycling. The metal was super rusty and unsafe to climb on, but this adventurous soul couldn't resist snapping some photos inside. Outside the sub, he found parts of tanks too. It seems the builders salvaged whatever they could from the old military base. Our final incredible find: the remains of 4 brave soldiers. A group of dedicated Russian searchers made a somber yet meaningful discovery: the remains of 4 soldiers who lost their lives in the Battle of Kursk. They used all documents and battle maps from the 948th Rifle Regiment to pinpoint the location. Russian investigators and searchers carefully recovered the skeletal remains of these heroes. Among the remains, they found personal belongings like a cross, a belt, and a razor. Sadly, without any identification tags, they couldn't determine the soldiers' names. Based on the documents, they believed the battle on this field took place on October 17, 1943. These brave soldiers were laid to rest with full military honors. The dangerous finds. Russian workers found World War II ammunition during the repair work on the train tracks near the city of Volgograd. The miners examined the surrounding area and found several dozen more explosive items from the war. There were shells, mortar shells, grenades, and 1 aircraft rocket manufactured in Germany and the USSR. All the items found were destroyed by detonation. It's hard to even imagine what could have happened if the ammunition detonated during the passage of the passenger train. It's really frightening that many more such dangerous items still lie in the ground. 1945 treasure. Another interesting find was made by a World War II artifact seeker from the city of Kaliningrad. As usual, he went metal detecting in search of military artifacts to the site of the former German village, which existed until 1945. Local residents left their homes with the Red Army approaching. All the property they couldn't take with them was buried. One of these caches was found by the searcher. It was European-produced crockery from the 19th and 20th centuries: sets, glasses, vases, and plates. The most valuable find was a moose figure mounted on a huge piece of amber. According to the searcher, this was the most valuable find in the entire treasure. The guy didn't sell the find, but gave everything to his friends in the museum. Now anyone can see this unique collection. A German bomb. Another operation to defuse some World War II ammunition was carried out by the deminers of the city of Sevastopol. An explosive object was found on February 15th in the Balaklava district near Lukomska Street. Experts of the emergency department identified it as an aircraft bomb weighing 50 kilograms, a German SC-50. Its condition and the type of fuse allowed it to be transported for destruction to the firing range. Local residents were evacuated from the neighboring houses until the bomb was taken to a safe distance. A German bunker in northern Russia. During the World War II, the Nazi German soldiers were able to gain a foothold quite far north of the USSR. One of the main targets in Russia's north was Murmansk, which came under regular air attacks. The area around Murmansk was lined with German fortifications. One of these fortifications was a stronghold known as K6 Geisberg, after Geisberg Mountain east of Salzburg. The 82nd Mountain Engineer Battalion of the Wehrmacht's 2nd Mountain Infantry Division built this stronghold in 1941. The division was formed in 1938 and was also known as Stone or Height 200 in documents from that era. The main crew was Austrian. In June 1941, the 2nd Mining Division attacked Murmansk. However, it was withdrawn to Norway in November of the same year for replenishment. From 1942 to 1944, it was transferred to Luostari and Petsamo in the Pechenga district of the Murmansk region. In October 1944, when the Soviets surrounded them, the combat units of the division escaped from the fortifications and were withdrawn to Denmark. The division, which had already been reformed, surrendered to the Allied troops who had only just entered the war. As you climb the mountain, even on the approaches to the firing positions, you can still see the remains of rows of German barbed wire. It's still lying on top of the Jagoland lichen, which differs from the Soviet one by more frequent weaving of barbs. The area is littered with bits and pieces from exploded mines and shells. At the very top you'll find stone fortifications. There are also some shelters made of corrugated steel, which are called foxholes. You'll also find shell casings from German cartridges here and there. There are also some trenches made of stone that connect many of the firing points. Just a few kilometers from the main fortifications on the hill near the lake, there's another small hill called Height 222. There's a small German bunker built in a granite mountain at the base of it. Based on German and Soviet operational maps, it seems this bunker was built in 1942, when the defense of the polar region stabilized. You can still see part of a concrete plaque with inscriptions above the entrance to the mountain. It was just a basic shelter for the garrison personnel and pretty standard for a German fortification in the polar region of the stronghold. This one was a pair of rooms with the main entrance at the foot. What made it different from similar objects is that it had an emergency exit punched up to the machine gun firing point. There are lots of remnants of rockets from Soviet BM-13 Katyusha near the German fortifications. These were used by Soviet soldiers to knock the Germans and Austrians out. On the hill, you can find scattered parts of a German airplane, probably a bomber that fell from anti-aircraft fire. Unfortunately, most of it was taken by hunters and tourists for souvenirs and non-ferrous metal. A Churchill tank. Last year, on our channel, you could see several videos about the wonderful Museum of World War II military equipment by Vadim Zadorozhny, located in Moscow. Find the link to these videos in the description below. That time, you could see that the English tank Mk4 Churchill waited to be restored on the street platform. The condition of the exhibit was terrible. Probably it was used as a target on the shooting range. Its hull was riddled with bullets and shell holes of various calibers. This year, the museum's restorers did a great job. The tank was restored to working condition. Of course, it wasn't possible to find an original working engine. However, the museum specialist did a great job and installed an engine which was very similar to the original. The restoration is not finished yet. There are still a lot of small details that will be installed in the near future. However, the tank is now on display in the museum's outdoor area. A pistol from 1921. A few years ago, a young man living in Kazakhstan inherited an old house from a deceased relative. Last year, he decided to renovate the house and started to tear down the walls for remodeling. After tearing off some boards, he noticed a bundle of old rags. When he unwrapped it, he found an old pistol. The gun was in good condition and fully oiled, but it had traces of old corrosion on it that made it impossible to read the name. He did notice, however, that the gun looked a lot like an American Colt 1911, only in a smaller form. After spending some time in the internet, the guy found out that it was a Spanish Star MMS model 1921 pistol. It was chambered for the 7.63 Mauser cartridges. They were also called Spanish Colts because of the resemblance. These pistols were also made with the 9mm cartridges. How this gun came to be in the wall of the house is not known. It is most likely that the gun was brought back from the war by a relative who kept it just in case. In order not to get into trouble with the law, the young man took the gun to the police. He also made a video of the incident. The police told him that the gun would be handed over to the local museum after their examination. Il-2 plane. According to residents of the Prokhorovsky district, an airplane crashed in their village during the war. Thanks to the help of local old-timers, the searchers almost immediately found the crash site and discovered fragments of the plane. After studying the details, they came to the conclusion that it was an Il-2 fighter. The remains of the pilot were found nearby. Among the things found at the crash site were the pilot's personal belongings, the cover of the certificate of the 61st Red Banner Azov Aviation Regiment, fragments of a leather belt and green clothes, a carbine of the parachute system, and red boot of size 45. After a while, it was possible to determine the name of the pilot. He turned out to be First Lieutenant Boris Belokhvostov. According to archival data, he died on July 8, 1943, in a single-seat Il-2. The searchers managed to find the pilot's relative in Moscow, his niece, Marina Kudryashova, and informed her about the find. After some time, she shared the documents and photos stored in the family archive. Among the documents, there was a letter from the commander of the squadron, Ovchinnikov. It was written in September 1943. Here's what it said. We accomplished the task, bombed and stormed a group of enemy tanks and infantry with our powerful fire. We flew back to our airfield. Leaving the target, Belokhvostov maneuvered confidently. He flew to my left at the distance of 150 meters. On the way, we were met by strong anti-aircraft fire from the Germans. As a commander, I protected myself from anti-aircraft fire, but at the same time I had to keep an eye on the other aircraft coming with me. And here, while inspecting the left wing, I saw a mass of bursts of anti-aircraft shells and smoke around Belokhvostov's plane. Probably one of the shells hit the pilot's cockpit. The plane controlled by Belokhvostov began to fall randomly. Then it went into a corkscrew and, at the second turn, fell to the ground. A column of dust rose into the air and was visible as long as I could observe it. The letter also said that the pilot was buried by local residents near the plane after the fighting, when the area where the Il-2 fell was liberated. The searchers reburied the remains of the pilot in the military cemetery. The T-70 tank. For 65 years, the T-70 tank lay at the bottom of the river in the deep mud near the village of Mayskaya, near the city of Volgograd. It was 16 years ago that the searchers managed to find it and send it for restoration. The T-70 is a light tank of the Second World War, whose task was to escort infantry. As the first stage of restoration, the tank was washed and was on display as a monument in the city of Volgograd. But now, with the help of the museum reserved the Battle of Stalingrad, there is an opportunity to return it to its former appearance and restore it to its working condition. It turned out to be a rare type of T-70B tank. Only 40 of them were produced in the Gorky factory. After lifting the tank from the river, bandages, shoes, fragments of bones were found inside. Probably the crew was killed, but unfortunately, it wasn't possible to determine the identity of the crew. The crew of this vehicle consisted of 2 people, a mechanic driver at the bottom and a commander in the turret who performed all functions, commanding, firing, and loading. The longest and the most difficult stage of the restoration is over now. All that remains is to assemble and install the parts. More than 70% of the tank has kept its original parts. A number of elements, rollers and tracks were lost. The original parts were searched all over the country. The missing parts were made according to the factory drawings. This tank took part in the Battle of Stalingrad. According to historians, it was decommissioned in December 1942. A soldier with a letter. In May 2023, searchers from the city of St. Petersburg discovered the remains of a Red Army soldier. Near him, a protective cuirass and a shield from a Maxim machine gun, pierced by shrapnel, were found. And there was another soldier nearby. He had a medal for the defense of Leningrad, a straight razor, an anointing oil, a mouthpiece, a spoon, and a small book, a prayer book as we thought. And as soon as the book was opened, it turned out to be a letter with all the soldiers' data in it. It was a miracle. It has happened many times before that everything rots and bones almost disappear in dense soil. But it is the paper not protected by anything that is preserved. The archive immediately identified the soldier. Volkhonsky Vasily Sisoevich, born in 1915, drafted into the army from the Leningrad city in 1941. He was a machine gunner and died in 1943. The searchers also managed to find his relatives, and this is a photo of Vasily. A German box. A few years ago, a young man was digging on his property. He hit something metal with his shovel. As he dug, he saw a large box that was locked. With the help of the shovel, the box was immediately opened, and the man was in disbelief. There were the belongings of a German officer inside the box. There was the uniform of the captain of the medical service and his personal belongings. Sorting through the things, the guy found 2 bottles of Jamaican rum and 2 boxes of cigars, as well as a wallet with change and paper bills. The personal ID of the owner of the box was in his jacket pocket. It is remarkable that all of these items were in perfect condition, as there was no evidence of moisture inside. It was impossible to find out who this captain was and for what reason he had buried all of his belongings. Probably during the Red Army offensive, the German officer couldn't take so many things with him and decided to bury them in the hope that he would return soon. But this never happened, and the chest remained in the ground for many decades. The young man donated everything he found to the local museum. From the bottom of the Black Sea in the area of the Crimean Bridge, the first of the found Il-2 attack aircrafts from the Second World War was lifted. Remains of the pilots were not found in the cockpit. In total, the search group discovered 3 Soviet Il-2s at the bottom of the Black Sea. They are preserved in satisfactory condition and lie at a depth of about 10 meters in the area of the Kerch Strait. The search group will now establish the identity of the Il-2 to aviation units, the names of the crew members, and the date of their death. Probably the planes were shut down in 1943 during the Kerch-Eltingen landing operation, carried out with the aim of liberating the Kerch Peninsula. And here is another Il-2 found near Novorossiysk. They were looking for it for 2 years. Divers work at the place of discovery. They're trying to clear the stormtrooper of silt and get to the engine. This will help identify the aircraft by number. The work is complicated by the fact that the Il-2 lies upside down. In addition, it's impossible to get the remains of the pilot to establish his identity. More than 36,000 Il-2s were produced during the war. The Il-2 was nicknamed the Flying Tank because of its reliability and effective attacks during the Second World War. The Germans called it Black Death. Archaeologists and divers will continue to work near the Crimea and Taman. Researchers are convinced that more than 2,000 objects of the Great Patriotic War are located in this area. In 2019, in the Prokhorovsky district near Belgorod, a search group discovered the German tank Panzerkampfwagen 4. The tank was hit during the Grand Battle of the Kursk Bulge in August 1943. Apparently, the ammunition exploded inside the tank and the hull was completely destroyed. The combat vehicle was of sand color, which indicated the arrival of this tank from the African Corps. The Germans were in a hurry to bring the tank into battle that didn't even have time to apply a camouflage color. 722, this number is clearly visible on the turret. It makes it possible to establish the entire combat path of the tank and the crew names. Despite the fact that such a tank was mass-produced and not unique, only a few remain now. It's impossible to assemble the whole machine from the found parts, but many elements can be used by restorers to recreate other similar tanks. Shortly before this, a turret from such a Panzerkampfwagen 4 was found near Stavria's coal city in excellent condition. The notorious Sychovka became the scene of fierce battles in 1942. For both the Red Army and the Wehrmacht, the Battle of Rjev was a huge loss. A huge amount of abandoned equipment remained on the battlefields, but the country needed metal and all captured weapons, including tanks, were sent for remelting. But one German Panzerkampfwagen 3 was lucky. He drowned in a swamp and was raised only in 2002. The tank was in excellent condition, the native color was perfectly preserved. There was a full ammunition, a machine gun, crew personal belongings and MP-40 assault rifles inside. Unfortunately, the fate of this tank is tragic. They planned to illegally sell it to Belarus. The tower and caterpillars were detained at the border while trying to export under the guise of scrap metal and after some time were sent to Moscow Museum. But the hull was nevertheless taken out and is currently exhibited in the Museum of Minsk with a fake turret. In February 2020, the tower of the legendary T-34 was taken out of the ground in the Belgorod region. The tank turret with number 31 was discovered by local residents in the village of Yakovleva. The search group of the Ognenaya Duga Club and the police arrived at the place of the find. After that, the turret of the tank was lifted by a crane from the ground, though without the upper part where the hatches were located. It looks like there was an explosion of the ammunition and the turret was blown up by an explosion. This is evidenced by the absence of the upper part of the turret. This could happen from an enemy shell hit, or the crew themselves could blow the T-34 up so that it wouldn't go to the enemy. After the swamp mud was washed away from the turret, it was discovered that there was no shutter or sight on the tank gun. Therefore, the searchers came to the conclusion that the tank was blown up by the crew during the forces' retreat in March 1943, when the Soviet troops had to leave Belgorod, which was liberated almost a month before.
World War II weapons. Polish police officers recently made a big discovery. They found dozens of firearms, including machine guns, pistols, and grenades. They also found different types of ammunition and some important parts of the guns. Some of these weapons were brand new, still oiled, while others were dug up from the battlefields. They were hiding weapons in garages, sheds, and outbuildings. The Yak-1B. At the end of May 2024, searchers at the Battle of Kursk site found pieces of a crashed Soviet airplane. They carefully examined the pieces and found the engine number 43397. This was a huge stroke of luck. Now they could find out what happened to the pilot. Did he survive or die? They found out that the engine was installed on the Yak-1B plane number 25128 at plant number 292 Saratov in April 1943. The plane was transferred to the 27th Fighter Aviation Regiment. On May 14, 1943, the plane was shot down in a dogfight. The pilot, Sergeant Mikhail Grisha, was killed. At 6:44 p.m., a group of enemy planes, including 9 U-87s, under the cover of 6 Messerschmitt Bf-109s, tried to attack the Prava Road airfield. They were met by anti-aircraft fire and 6 Yak-1 airplanes in the air. 4 more planes were also scrambled. The group of enemy planes was scattered by the attack of Soviet planes and anti-aircraft fire. The bombs were dropped randomly. 6 bombs fell on the northeastern edge of the airfield and 16 fell outside the airfield boundaries. 5 German planes were shot down in the ensuing air battle. Lieutenant Gulaev, the squadron navigator, shot down 1 plane. When he ran out of armor, he rammed his plane into the second one, using his right wing. The plane went into a spin, but he managed to eject with his parachute and land in the territory occupied by our troops. 2 Soviet airplanes were shot down over Pravorod. 2 pilots died, Mikhail Grisha and Fyodor Muratov. On May 15, 1943, with full military honors and the presence of the all-regiment personnel, the dead pilots were buried in the garden in the center of the village of Grushki. World War II cache. A few years ago, searchers from Ukraine found a cache of ammo from World War II. They were digging in the forest far away from a village. There were fierce battles in these areas in 1941 and 1944. The guys' metal detectors showed a strong metal signal near the trees. They found a zinc box buried about 3 feet deep. They decided to open the box right there. The soil was dry and the contents of the box were well preserved. Inside was a piece of paper with a packing date, which said 1937. The box contained Soviet cartridges for a Mosin rifle. The guys debated for a long time whether the cartridges were still usable or they had gotten damp. After checking the pit with a metal detector, they pulled out a pile of cartridges and a tin can, also full of cartridges. It's impossible to know who buried the cartridges in the forest or why they did it. It could have been partisans or local residents. Forgotten tanks of the Shikotan Island. The Shikotan Island. This is the most southeastern part of Russia. After the Second World War, tank caponiers were built to suppress the fire of the landing force of the probable enemy. They are located all around the perimeter of the island, sometimes in the most unexpected places. Nowadays, they are abandoned. These 2 and these 3 tanks are deeply dug into the hills, and between them there are ditches. In some places, they are even filled with concrete. The whole hill is a well-fortified and equipped defense. It is impossible to see the tanks from the sea. Until 1994, the tanks were in full combat readiness. The tank's powerful armor and the crew's constant combat training posed a serious problem for the potential enemy of the time. There were regular exercises, firing, and other similar activities. The personnel was located in the nearby premises. The batteries were defended from the rear, wire fencing, machine gun emplacements, and etc. These tanks will never be in action again. Their barrels have been rusty for a long time now. Now it's an open-air museum. Only the exhibits are not looked at for a long time. But once it was a formidable force capable of delaying the enemy, if not stopping him. Anyone can come here and climb inside the tank. You can turn the knob and turn the turret or raise the gun barrel. Besides, a beautiful view from the height opens for every tourist. A German car. For the past year, researchers from the city of Volgograd have been conducting excavations at the site of the Battle of Stalingrad. The guys managed to make a unique find despite severe frost and wind. A German Horch 901 car was found at a depth of 1.5 meters. The car wasn't in the best shape. A lot of parts were missing and had just been rotting in the ground for 80 years, but the frame of the car was in good condition. These cars were produced in Germany from 1937 to 1943. They had 4-wheel drive and were widely used by Wehrmacht and SS units. Searchers spent 3 days digging the car out. After that, the Horch 901 was cleaned from the rust. Some parts were found to be in excellent condition and the axles appeared oiled. Soon, this World War II rarity will be restored. 182 fighters. The remains of 182 Soviet soldiers and commanders were buried at the Sinyavinsky Heights Memorial. They were discovered by searchers near this memorable place. On the basis of the preserved personal belongings, it was possible to identify 10 soldiers. Relatives of one of those killed, Georgy Ryadov, came from Kaliningrad to attend the ceremony. They received his medal for the defense of Leningrad, a spoon, and a dog tag with his personal data. Lyudmila Davidova, Georgy Ryadov's niece, said, "We are grateful to our searchers who brought back our heroes from that faraway, terrible war." The memory of the fallen defenders was honored with a minute's silence. Flowers were laid at the obelisk to commemorate the Soviet soldiers who died fighting for Leningrad. In 2023, the remains of more than 1,500 Red Army soldiers, found by searchers, were buried in the Leningrad region. A weapon cache. This find was discovered 10 years ago in the Ukraine, so the quality of the video leaves much to be desired. But we couldn't just pass such a story without showing it. Two guys found a cache of World War II weapons in the woods. There were 47 Mosin rifles, 7 PPS-41 submachine guns, 1 anti-tank gun, 2 Degtyaryov and 9 Maxim machine guns. All the weapons were buried in a single, large hole. It is unknown who made this cache and why. Maybe it were partisans fighting the Nazis or Red Army soldiers retreating. The boys had another theory. In their opinion, it could have been local people who had collected weapons at the battle site for storage until better times. It'll all come in handy, you know. The condition of the weapon was not the best, but the searchers got a lot of positive emotions from digging up such a cache. ZIS-5 truck. A ZIS-5 truck which worked on the Road of Life during the blockade of Leningrad was lifted from the bottom of Ladoga Lake in the Leningrad region. The Road of Life was the name given by the people of Leningrad to the ice road across Ladoga, which was put into operation in November 22, 1941. It operated for 2 winters and was the only line of communication of besieged Leningrad. It transported more than 16 million different cargoes, including military supplies, and evacuated more than 1 million people during the entire period. The village of Kabono, located on the eastern shore of the lake, was the main evacuation point during the siege of Leningrad, through which the Road of Life passed. The recovery of the truck took place in difficult weather conditions. There was a lot of shaking, wind and rain, and this made the process difficult in many ways. Unfortunately, wooden parts of the truck were not preserved. The frame, axles and the engine survived, as well as the tires of the wheels. The truck had metal skids on the front wheels for ice and snow conditions. Under what circumstances the Z5 sank has not been clarified. There are no holes or damage from enemy shells and bullets. Probably the car fell into the ice hole after the enemy bomb. The ZIS-5 must be thoroughly examined by specialists. Experts do not exclude the possibility that the car will be restored to working condition. Yak-9L. Fragments of the Soviet Yak-9 aircraft of the famous Moskva squadron, as well as the remains of the heroic pilot who died in the spring of 1945 in his last battle during the East Prussian offensive operation, were recovered from the ground in the Kaliningrad region. From the depth of more than 4 meters, parts of the engine of the aircraft with the number 32727 were recovered, along with the weaponry that had been smashed to pieces by the impact on the ground. A 20mm Schwach cannon and 14.7mm UB machine gun.
the remains of the pilot, the Order of the Patriotic War of the Second Degree, fragments of uniforms, documents, service weapon TT pistol were found in the place where the fragments of the aircraft were found. Miraculously preserved for 80 years, fragments of the certificates of receipt of allowances, certificate of award in the Order of the Patriotic War of the Second Degree were found. Thanks to them, it became clear that the remains belonged to the Guard First Lieutenant Lev Pevsner, born in 1920, a native of the town of Yelna, Smolensk region, a commander of the 168th Fighter Division. The fighter bomber was hit by enemy anti-aircraft artillery. It crashed on the outskirts of the modern village of Lipovka. First Lieutenant Pevsner will be buried with military honors in a mass grave at the memorial in the village of Svoboda, Chernihovsky district, after the forensic examination of the remains and answers to questions from the Central Archive of the Defense Ministry. A gun in a ditch. A young man from Poland was walking through the woods looking for an adventure. At the edge of the forest in a ditch, he noticed metal sticking out from under the autumn leaves. He decided to take a closer look and pulled it up to the surface. The strange piece of iron turned out to be a rifle from the Second World War. The man began to dig through the leaves and found a whole arsenal of weapons of all different types and models. It was clear that someone had deliberately left them in a heap. Maybe it was a tractor driver who collected these artifacts of war while plowing the land. The weapons were very rusty, but still it was a very interesting find. That's all for today, folks. You can send us a super thank you or become a sponsor, supporting our channel to create new historical videos. Good luck to all!